Welcome back to Top 10 Tunes. Today we're going to be looking at the top 10 traditional death metal bands of all time. At number 10 are the purveyors of stadium death metal, Gatecreeper. Within the new millennium and decades after its inception, death metal had splintered off into many subgenres and consequent subcultures. These include but aren't limited to technical death metal, brutal and slam death metal, and the controversial deathcore. By Gatekeeper's full-length debut in 2016, they helped to consolidate and encourage the new wave of old-school death metal artists. The key to their sound? A simplicity and punk aesthetic that values straightforward songwriting and arrangement above large and all-encompassing conceptualization. Gatecreeper reminds us of death metal's beginnings, while modernizing this rough and ready sound, warts and all. Taking our number 9 spot are the Swedish revivalist Bloodbath. Similar to the old-school death metal revivalists in the United States, Bloodbath disregarded the European melodic death metal and grindcore influences in favor of performing the original Stockholm sound. Modeling themselves after the big four of Swedish death metal, Bloodbath delivers simple riffing mixed with the classic Boss HM2 pedal. Delivering this buzzsaw guitar tone, Bloodbath are both irreparably and intentionally tied to the original Swedish death metal aesthetic. Their influence would push forward the entire scene and would renew interest in the creation of grotesque and comically horrific death metal. At number 8 are the criminally underrated Massacre. While never achieving the mainstream success or career longevity of their peers, Massacre in many ways are the embodiment of the original Florida death metal sound. The riffs retain a connection to thrash metal, and the solos are atonal and wailing, and the vocals are primitive bark in comparison to modern metal's delivery. Their musical characteristics combined with the Lovecraftian imagery and lyrics do admittedly date the band, but retain a quality not found within death metal since its humble beginnings. For further evidence of Massacre's undoubtable influence, members of the band performed on Death's Leprosy and Spiritual Healing albums. At number 7 is the original Swedish death metal band Entombed. Evolving from the band Nihilist, Entombed developed upon the original Florida death metal sound by distancing themselves from San Francisco Bay Area thrash metal and channeling their influences strictly through the death metal milieu. Detuned to B standard tuning and having their sound captured at the now legendary Sunlight Studio, Entombed created a sound that in some ways has become more synonymous with traditional death metal than its original pioneers. Their innovation would continue to pass their debut Left Hand Path by implying hard rock performance practice in the context of death metal, creating a death and roll. But ultimately, their first statement made the longest lasting impact and has made Entombed one of the most influential Swedish bands both in and out of death metal. Solidifying number 6 is the thematic Bolt Thrower, the only English band featured on this list. Bolt Thrower initially began as a grindcore band, this subgenre itself being a notably English extreme metal phenomenon. However, Bolt Thrower would quickly transition to a death metal band of both quality and remarkable consistency across their discography. Aiding in this is their use of source of inspiration and muse for musical concepts, Warhammer 40k, even going as far as collaborating with Games Workshop for a few songs. This association has provided Bolt Thrower with immense content to work with and a large dedicated fan base to connect with death metal and vice versa. They certainly have one of the most unique sources of horrific and graphic imagery to pull from. Rounding out our list at number 5 is the not-so-tribute group Gruesome. Most people understand the concept of cover and tribute bands as those that perform other artists' material and sometimes will mimic their onstage appearance and mannerisms. Gruesome, however, write and perform all original material, but they unabashedly model their sound after the band Death. While this might sound like a gimmick, what Gruesome creates are fantastic traditional death metal albums with a modern production aesthetic that sound like they were written by the forefathers of the genre. For those that enjoy death metal as it once was and wish Death's discography could have continued, Gruesome fills that particular void in excellence. At number 4 are the endlessly controversial Morbid Angel. Part of death metal's original wave of bands, Morbid Angel created a through line from Slayer's use of satanic imagery to their own material centered around satanic, hedonistic, and Lovecraftian horror themes. As their frontman changed, they would incorporate ancient Sumerian and barbaric themes and would evolve how they imply violence in musical form. By recalling real and historical imagery, their take on death metal would influence the globalization of death metal and the birth of black metal as an outgrowth of death metal, as it is most raw and unhinged. While Morbid Angel would struggle to keep up with the new trends in metal in the new millennium, their early releases are legacy releases through and through. At number 3 is Obituary. Never a band to falter from the original death metal sound, it can be said that the thick humidity of their native Florida has seeped into the music itself. Even on their first record, Slowly We Rot, which was recorded in E standard tuning, these early tracks still compete with the heaviness of modern death metal recordings. The irregular use of Fender guitars and the Rat distortion pedal have created an inadvertent approach to the creation of death metal music that has led to a consistency across the career of Obituary, along with Cause of Death and the end complete Obituary, established themselves as being the dirtier, grittier alternative to the band Death, and are one of the longest running and one of the original Florida death metal bands around today. At number 2 are the innovators of brutal death metal and the purveyors of the parental guidance sticker, Cannibal Corpse. In many ways, Cannibal Corpse are the AC/DC of death metal. They provide a consistency in their sound and have had 2 distinct eras due to having 2 equally influential frontmen, Chris Barnes and George Corpse Grinder Fisher. After the first album, Eaten Back to Life introduced Cannibal Corpse as a prominent voice in the then new death metal movement, their next releases, Butchered at Birth and Tomb of the Mutilated, began a style of increasingly horrific lyrics, consistently fast and complicated guitar riffs, and guttural vocals that became lower and borderline incomprehensible. Cannibal Corpse have become the face of the genre in many respects, and for the mainstream public represent not only death metal, but underground subgenres of all kinds at their most outrageous and horrific. And at number 1 goes to the aptly named first name in death metal, Death. Before the release of their first album, Chuck Schuldiner, then named Mantis, was performing heavy metal that was distinctly darker and heavier than the thrash metal released at the time. By the release of the groundbreaking Scream Bloody Gore, a new subgenre has been established, along with a regional scene and body of peers performing and perfecting death metal as it's known today. As quickly as Death would pioneer death metal's initial sounds and tropes, they would evolve to include real and philosophical horrors in their lyrics, before transcending traditional death metal to create the music of progressive and technical complexity. Despite this evolution and corresponding disownment of their earlier music and aesthetic, Death are recognized as the true originators of death metal and are revered for their creation to this day.